headdresses. There used to be kingfishers in China, but all of that blue is kingfisher feathers, and the kingfisher is long since extinct. They were hunted out to make all of that wonderful kind of iridescent blue. And then at the top of that would have been these phoenix hooks that would have hooked into the headpiece, and things would have dangled off of them in great numbers. So this is a pair that are in gold filigree. And then all over the headdress would have been these kinds of marvelous bits and pieces, in this case gold with gemstones inlaid, so a very elaborate kind of conspicuous consumption, signs of power and so on. Earrings, in this case the pair of earrings are solid gold, and they're figures, and they're about this big, and they must have hurt like the dickens, huh? With those big hooks. Obviously they had pierced ears. If you look at her overall garb, she has this, red textiles with yellow phoenix, the phoenix being the symbol of the empress. And then if you look at the girl behind, she's carrying a box. This would have been a presentation box, and this is a piece that we have in our collection that I think is very close actually to that kind of a box. This is a woven bamboo box with a lacquered cover and a lacquer on the base. And in the case of our piece, it actually says on it that it was meant to present a textile. And then these textile wrappings. It was kind of fun doing this exhibition, going through and look at these portraits and finding things that matched. And here's a textile. This is a wrapper, like a furoshiki, if those of you who are familiar with the Japanese tradition. Well, this is the Ming version thereof, and things would have been presented or come wrapped in these kinds of elaborate textiles. There's the inside of it, that imperial, marvelous imperial yellow. And then, again, any number of kind of marvelous textiles, and you can see this piece of fabric matches up pretty well. This is a kind of a regional type done in Shanxi province. So, again, it's fun to talk about that. We don't have time to go into that today. Lacquered furniture. Most of the furniture in the court environment would have been lacquer. And we see a good example here. This piece actually was on view here in 1998, 1999 maybe. And it's very similar to it's in mother of pearl inlaid black lacquer with, again, lots of symbolism, and it's very similar to the piece seen in the portrait. So that's kind of the more public areas and the kind of official look. And now let's go back into the more private sections of the city. Again, even in the more private sections of the city, if you look, there are these marvelous animals, and along these tiles would have had dragons on them. Everything's yellow, so there's symbolism everywhere. The emperor and the imperial family never really got away from that kind of symbolism. And that's particularly true for the emperor. In this case, of those 60,000 people living in Beijing that are part of the imperial family, within the Forbidden City, a lot of them were women. These were the concubines, these were the empresses. These were people that were living in a kind of gilded cage. They were stuck there. They couldn't go out. People couldn't come in. They were kind of stuck there. But they had their own entertainments. They had their own kinds of their life. But I don't think it was particularly wonderful. And I don't think it was particularly fruitful. But here we are. We have a marvelous hand scroll in the Shanghai Museum of court women in the inner palace, attributed to an artist active in the very end of the 1400s and around 1500s. And that gives a pretty good idea of what that environment may have been like. And it also gives us a pretty good idea of what some of the objects may have been like. So in this case, this is a lacquered stool with a cloisonne inlay top. The lacquer has mother of pearl inlay. These kinds of stools were the kind of casual furniture of the time, and you see a number of them, of these women actually sitting on them in an exterior environment or an informal environment. This is what you would sit on. If you were doing something a little more formal, or perhaps if you were a little more important, you'd sit on a chair like that. But most everybody, most of the time, in casual or informal circumstances, you'd be sitting on these stools. Again, we have an object being taken in to be presented to somebody. They're carrying this. This girl is carrying an object, and looking at it closely, we determined that it was a guri lacquer, this kind of carved lacquer box. Again, often made for presentation of one kind of an object or another. So something would be inside of it. The presentation would be made. It would be open, and there they would be. Here we see a girl carrying a ceramic vase. It looks yellow, doggone it. I wanted it to be just exactly the same, but not quite. But here's a vase in our collection that I think actually is a fairly close representation of what we're seeing there. And what they're watching is this. You see that? They're all looking over there, very, very interested. And you can see right here, that's the caddy. These people are playing golf in 15th century China. So those of you who are from Scotland and say golf was invented there, golf was being played in China in the 13th century, so you're wrong. And it's being played by court women and emperors as well. So, I mean, again, looking at this more casual, more informal environments in the court, the textile arts are just gorgeous. Imagine what all of these robes must have looked like. All these acres and acres of fabric, and then again, those kinds of wrappers and a variety of different kinds. The textile arts of the Ming were just incredible. That, of course, continued into the Qing, but Ming textiles are thought to be particularly high technology and high quality and beauty. And those that survive, very few that survive, really are. And here's some examples from that, the pieces that we were able to select from the fragments and the uncut pieces that were in raw silk and that had not been formed into garments. And the Palace Museum has a very nice collection of those. And these are some examples of the various kinds that we were able to pull out. Most of these have very rarely seen the light of day, so they're very much close to their original colors. You can get an idea of how gorgeous they must have been. Again, just covered with symbols of one sort or another, everything meaning something. Not just pretty decoration, but really meaning something, telling you something. And up under those sleeves, those big sleeves that you never ever see underneath, those women were also wearing some very elaborate decoration jewelry. Like this piece, which is from the Nanjing Municipal Museum, was excavated in a tomb dated somewhere between 1500 and 1550, and it has an inscription on it that tells us it was made under the supervision of the Imperial workshops and tells us the percentage and weight of the gold. So somewhere under those sleeves were these elaborate pieces of jewelry, bracelets and such. I had no idea. When we saw this, I said, well, that's Egyptian, that's not Chinese. Quite a marvelous piece. And there actually have been 5 of these excavated in that site. So in the tombs, the Ming Imperial tombs from around Nanjing. The emperor, of course, also had fun, but anytime he was awake, he had to represent the fact that he was the son of heaven. So anybody see what's going on in this? You know this game where you pitch the arrows? Okay, take a look at this. He's throwing red arrows, right? Somebody else was throwing green arrows. None of the green arrows are in, but all of the red arrows are in. The man couldn't fail. So this is the Xuande emperor, so 1426 to 87. A longhand scroll, again in the Palace Museum. And this gives us a pretty good idea of how some of these ceramics and things might have been used as well. I mean, it not only gives us a very good idea of the kinds of things that the Xuande emperor enjoyed and appreciated, but also gives us some idea of how some of these objects may have been used. So here we see a feast being prepared. Imagine a blue and white bowl or any number of kind of monochrome bowls or something being laid out like this. So they're not just blue and white bowls or monochrome bowls. They were actually used, and they were used in this kind of a situation where food was being served, chopsticks and so on and so forth. So when you see these, when you come over again tomorrow and see our nice collection of Ming monochromes, again, the colors have significance. They would have been used in some kind of a court environment, perhaps for something as mundane as a meal, perhaps for something as significant as a very important ceremony. But they did have a use. Every one of these had a function. They were not just kind of great technological achievements and beautiful objects, but they actually had a function, and a very key function in the emperor and his right to rule, showing his right to rule. So some of those bigger pieces, the kind of presentation pieces, would have been like this, shown on a table and shown on stands and given real presence. So this is, again, a kind of conspicuous consumption, or certainly I I have the power, I have the money, only I have these kinds of objects. I am the son of heaven. And that applies not only to the objects, but also to the table those objects are displayed on. This is the top of a lacquer table in our collection, a red lacquer table. Lacquer is infamous because the wood moves and the lacquer doesn't. It breaks and cracks and falls apart. So the Band-Aids on here really are Band-Aids. This piece is undergoing reconstruction, restoration, and we're not quite done. But it is really a beautiful piece. Those are great dragons. There are mobs and mobs of dragons running around the top of this. And this is all thick layers of red lacquer that's been carved, and then with the designs inlaid with gold and pigments and so on. A very elaborate and very wonderful piece of lacquer art, but also a great table. And you can imagine that's what this table would have looked like. And of course, sitting on that table would have been these kinds of objects, objects of display of power and authority. So very good. Patrick, should we come up here and start our questions and answers here?
Thank you, Mike. Michael didn't get to show you. You sure this is working?
Oh.
These are the most high-tech. Every time when I die, I'm leaving the university a huge bequest to move into the 21st century. Michael didn't get to show you everything in his wonderful museum. There are beds that are fabulous, carved from rosewood, I believe. Fabulous pieces of furniture. Everything you ever wanted to have in your own little home. We have some wonderful visitors with us today, so I don't want to take all the time talking. I will say that Michael told me something that all of you should think about. There was recently, when the Ming go, the Manchus from the north come, their Chinese name is the Ching Dynasty, one of the greats was the Qinglong. Well, a vase, very much like a vase they have from the same period of the Qinglong, was recently sold for something like $18 million. And therefore, why is that a problem? It's not a problem for the person who had the 18 million, nor the person who has to put it in a safe deposit box. It's a problem for the museum in San Francisco because suddenly the insurance on their like-looking piece goes up to $18 million.
It's a real problem because we can't sell. So all that happens is as the market, and the market has gone really crazy. As the market goes crazy, all it does to us is impact our bottom line because it impacts our insurance.
And the funny people that are buying now are people out of Hong Kong, and a great market there, and the Chinese are back in the market wanting their stuff back. If you remember the little scandal when Yves Saint Laurent died, there was a rabbit that went up for sale in Paris. It turned out to be a rabbit that came from a fountain as a zodiac figure, and the Chinese were furious that it was up for sale in Paris, and someone in Beijing, no, excuse me, either in Shanghai or Hong Kong, put a bid on for it, and then when he won, he refused to pay. So on and on goes the idea of repatriating the private processes back to the Chinese people. Mary is here from our art and she just hates me for this. Art and plus architecture, and I want her, because she's here with some of her students, you must have a question. Are you thinking? You don't have a question yet?
I did have a question about the people who did the textiles. I mean, in terms of the rank of the individuals who would be producing textiles, and also the gender. Would it have been the sole, purpose of women to do the embroidery? Who did the weaving?
So the simple answer to a complicated question. Let me see if I can work my way to it. I mean, labor was textiles were in traditionally meant to be done in part by women. At least that was something. There was an association, as was the raising of the silkworms and the silk. But in an industry that large, you have the industry of actually growing the silk, and that's a local industry that is done kind of on a relatively small scale. And probably a lot of the work was being done by women, the harvesting of the silkworms. And you see that in the paintings of the time. And then the actual weaving, those big manufactories were probably mixed, and maybe a lot of them were men in that case. The embroidery, the very, very fine embroidery, again, could go either way, but certainly women were involved in that kind of pursuit. At the Imperial level, it's hard, and at the level of production being done, it's hard for me to give a direct answer to that, and I'm not quite sure what the right answer is. Certainly women were involved in silk production. At that very large scale, I'm not certain how much of that was being done by women, because we don't know that much about the people in the workshops. We know a lot about how the orders were made. We know a lot about the eunuchs and the ordering system, and the role that they played, and how the orders got from the imperial court to either the workshops within the court or to the regional workshops, like Ching Dynasty, or all of that. We have very good evidence of that. But who the people were making the pieces, we don't, at least I'm not aware of direct references to that. We begin to get names of designers and people who were actually supervising the production in the kilns at Ching Dynasty, really only beginning in the Qing. We don't know too much about the actual people, even at that high level of supervising the production in the Ming, not that much. Just the names don't show up in the historical records that I'm aware of. Does that kind of answer your question?
Mary probably read the book that came with a person who we had here Gail Sukiyama wrote a wonderful book called Women of the Silk, and it's about the silk industries in 20th century China, but it focuses very heavily on young girls working in Suzhou and Wuxi in the current silk industry of the Chinese because of the small hands and the other work that they would do. And so some people have taken that book up as a condemnation of a process that reaches way back. If you've not read it, it's called Women of the Silk. Do I see anybody else with a hand up, or is there?
And mind you, there is evidence for that in the pictorial arts all the way from the late Bronze Age. As you see the sericultural scenes in those pictorial bronzes of the 6th, 5th, 4th century BCE, it's women who are who are maintaining the mulberry trees and working on the silk. So there's some truth to that, but I don't. If I were to make a categorical statement that the people working at the imperial textile workshops were women, I'm not comfortable making that statement.
In all the pictures that you showed tonight, the caption said that the medium used was ink and color, and I was wondering if you can kind of clarify what is meant by that. And I guess the reason I'm asking the question is that when you're familiar with Western art and the painting is based on tempera or based on oils, you know clearly what's going on there. And when Western artists started to use oils, they were able to achieve a very high color. And I was impressed by some of the paintings that you showed, how sharp the colors were. So can you explain what ink and color really means? Is it water-based, oil-based, or what?
So, so the basic medium for painting is a water-based medium in China. And the binders are an animal glue-like binder. So they're made, actually the material is made into like a stick. And the colors for black, which is ink, is basically a carbon-based, sometimes with lots of magical ingredients, but basically it's soot, it's carbon-based. So black, all the black lines that you would see, they're not so many black, well, the black lines in the landscape there in the back, that's ink, just like India ink, that's black. The various different colors, a lot of these are mineral pigments. So the green is malachite, the blue is ozurite, so those don't fade, and they stay the colors stay quite strong, they don't fade. The base material here is silk, but a lot of times it's on paper. These are court paintings, and there's a difference between court painting and literati painting. Most literati painting is just ink on paper. That's a whole different tradition, and that's a whole different series of aesthetic discussions and issues that I'm not dealing with here. But basically, it's a watercolor. It's not applied in layers, so you do your painting. You don't get to correct it. It's not like doing oils where you can layer over and make corrections. You do it once, you have to do it right. So you have to imagine that these people were very, very skilled. But this is basically a court artisan using a very fine brush. The nature of the Chinese brush is that it has short bristles in the middle and longer bristles on the outside, so it creates a well. You dip it in the ink or the color, and then you actually, as you use it, the watercolor runs out and onto the paper or the silk. It's a very interesting and a rather sophisticated process. But does that kind of give you a start? It's water. It's basically like a watercolor, but it's not exactly the same. And the tools and the traditions are quite different. Very, very different than oil painting. No similarity there at all.
The question about the